Good morning, everybody.
Good
How are we? It is not lost upon me that we are about to talk about bras and panties at an AI conference, so very excited.
Completely desensitized myself, but.
Clicker. Sorry. Forgot that handoff. In real life conference, there we go. Need to relearn all these things. So Writer is a generative AI platform. We've got a layer of large language model that we fine tune and train on customers' own data. When we met Ranjan, we had a lot less of this platform built out, but we were so fascinated by their use case, and they leaned in really heavily starting about a year ago. So way before all of the hype around generative AI, we had a customer that was quite excited to explore automation in their business. So fast forward a year later, there is a ton automated and semi-automated at Adore Me, and we'd love to walk you through that story beginning to end. Ready?
Let's do it.
All right, awesome. Ranjan, tell us about some of the challenges that you were thinking perhaps generative AI might be the solution for. How did you think about it, and how did you find Writer?
Yeah, so we found Writer, and again, for background, Adore Me, we're a direct-to-consumer intimate apparel brand founded in 2011. We were recently acquired by Victoria's Secret at the beginning of this year. And we had found Writer. We had been doing a lot more work around sustainability, and compliance was a big focus of that. And then Writer, using their style guide tool, we actually were able to incorporate a lot of really strict language rules for all of our copywriters to very easily get up to speed on how to write about sustainable products in a way that was compliant. That's where we started. I think it was fall of 2021. And then May had come to us and said, oh, by the way, we're working on something kind of interesting that might be exciting for you, something around generative AI, natural language generation. So we jumped on it. This is an area in a past life as a startup founder, had explored a little bit just around summarization and basic technologies. But yeah, we're very excited to jump into trying to automate things as much as possible.
And we had seen what they were doing around automating the editing of content to comply with brand guidelines. We had started working on our co-write feature, which from a place of deep understanding of someone's brand and content, we were essentially doing retrieval augmented generative to borrow Julian's case study from earlier. And we got started on essentially fine-tuning a model for some of the use cases that Ranjan had identified in the business. Ranjan, share with folks, as you talked about this internally, what were some of the reactions? What was some of the initial skepticism like around generative AI?
Yes, so spring of 2022, I can tell everyone, going to the team internally, going to copywriters to start with, going to anyone, people were very skeptical. Anytime I said anything about creating automated text and language generation, they were looking at me a little weird or a little threatened. And I think it was interesting, again, after the launch of ChatGPT, and this became much more in the public realm of conversation, people are a little more ready to talk about these things. But the problem that we saw was, at the beginning, even using some out-of-the-box tools, rival tools, just to test out, average does not get people excited. In fact, it makes them more skeptical about the content. When a copywriter sees something that's just so perfectly average, their first thought is, this is not great. Why are we doing this? Why am I wasting my time on this? So already starting at a point where working with the Writer team, working with Doris and being with Wasim and being walked through, how do we train something in our brand voice? Another thing at an AI conference that's funny to say, our brand voice is called Spirited Wing Woman. I can say that somewhat with a straight face. But again, it's like light, fun, airy, it's Gen Z-ish. So creating product descriptions in that voice was somewhere where we knew we had to start to get the trust of people on our team.
Yeah, Totally. What's interesting is a lot of the hype and the headlines make our people internally think that you are clicking a button and generating content that replaces their jobs. And the truth is a lot more complex. With Writer, what we are doing is fine-tuning models that are both LLM retrieval and post-processing based. So the way that we structure content, the way that we make sure the content is accurate, the way that we make sure it sounds like the person who would have written it originally is actually a process. And Ranjan's team walked through that, not without some hiccups, but definitely got to the finish line and a beautiful end result. What was it like to go through the data collection and cleansing and training process with Writer?
Yeah, so I think in Julian's presentation, I really liked one statement he said. It was like large models are at cost, but good data is an investment. And this is actually something for us. Our CTO for years has kind of like espoused clean and structured data. And it's funny because these are use cases that over time you see that you might never have expected. Having clean and structured data available makes your life easier and allows potential for use cases you might never have imagined. So even starting from a point, being able to pull all of our product attributes and easily connect them to the Writer ecosystem to generate product descriptions was something that was probably a little smoother for us given the history of clean and structured data. But the other thing we realized was, again, getting people used to this idea of fine-tuning or iteration in this content, getting people used to the idea that, again, starting point is going to be average, and then how do we get to a point where it's great? That was definitely the biggest cultural hurdle. And also in this process, realizing culture within an organization is just as much a part of this as technology. And I think as organizations dive into generative AI more, it's understanding that getting your people excited, understanding what's happening is just as important as the actual technological innovation and complexity.
The data point is really interesting. I mean, when we asked for push notifications ranked by response rate, or email subject lines by open rate, all things that we use to train the various custom templates. The Adore Me team was at the ready, right? It was not an issue. We have definitely worked with other enterprise customers where folks send you PDFs and we're literally there OCRing stuff to create a data set, or they tell you, hey, I actually hate all of the things I've ever written about this journey. I need to create data from scratch. So the data readiness piece is definitely a underexplored, almost table stakes, right? To be able to get to production with use cases that actually matter to the organization. And when we're all in sandbox land, it's okay. The C-suite's excited, the prototypes look sexy, it's fine. But when you actually put stuff in front of your actual employees and they think it is not great, right? It definitely sets the AI program backwards. And so, we were kind of mutually lucky that your folks got to see great results because the data was so clean and so good.
I like that, moving past sandbox land.
Yes,
that
right.
can be the new title of the presentation. Yeah.
When it was good, though, once we got there, was there pushback from the organization or hesitation around, how this would impact jobs? That might be interesting.
Well, yes and no. Yes, I think by the time, actually, this went into production fully in October, I believe. So there's definitely a number of iterations that we took to get to where this was fully production ready. And again, I think that idea of having something that's predictable and repetitive enough using deep learning to where you are okay with it going on your website is still a big thing that companies for them to undergo. It's versus that kind of first draft mentality. But the good thing is we had started with product descriptions, and we'll get more into how we choose what we tackled. This was the worst thing that one of the copywriters had to do. They had to do 80 to 100 product descriptions of 2 to 3 sentences every month. They would spend 30 to 35 hours a month. And if you can imagine trying to like be original and witty and funny over and over again, it was soul sucking. It was like, I mean, and even in our performance reviews, it was always like, this is what I hate doing the most. So to have that taken off the plate was a perfect area to start, versus if we were going to something where, you know, someone loves doing and truly feels as part of their creative process. And actually what the good part is, this opened up the opportunity for the right copywriter to then take on more creative tasks, which is kind of the dream around automation. So it was a very good place to start for us. And I think like, as people look at integrating this technology in enterprises, it's thinking about where is the path to least resistance, where are the areas that people will be excited about the technology rather than threatened at a starting point.
The automation piece is interesting because once you all kind of got through to step 4 of revising and refining the template that you used for various content types, Adore Me set up APIs for integrations. And that is really what allowed the PDPs or the product description pages to be automated. Can you talk a little bit about how you all did that, and at what point did you say, all right, you know, for this content type, we are happy enough with the quality and our quality tests that we're actually okay with this being an completely automated process?
Yeah, so what we started, let's say, generic. Then we took 23,000 historical product descriptions and in our spirited wingwoman voice and generated a new model. We called it the creative one. And it was pretty good. It actually caught the voice. It would say things in like this Gen Z voice. Like we joked about, one of them was like, it would put asterisks around the word actually, which I didn't understand. I thought was an error, but is apparently, we write in our product descriptions, it means like emphasis, it's sarcastic, I don't know.
Gen Z emphasis.
Gen Z, yes. Even emojis made it into the creative description. I remember like Halloween products would actually use like a ghost or a pumpkin emoji, but then you look back and you're like, oh, it's actually predictable because we've actually done that a number of times. But what we noticed at the time was, and we'll get more into this, but we had hired a new head of SEO. For those unfamiliar in the e-commerce space, after iOS 14, acquisition has become more challenging on platforms. So SEO became an even more fundamental part of the business. And then we really started to think, okay, the creative stuff is fun, but can we start using this more to suit a really specific business strategy around SEO? And so then we redid the whole thing, iterated probably 2 times, and then got to a point where we're like, okay, this is production ready. And then this is the kind of thing we hacked together with just one of our junior developers. And again, we had an API to all of our backend data, writer's API. I don't quite understand how it all works, but he said was very nice to work with. And then we basically built a little tool where internally we can just throw in a product ID, it pulls out the attributes, generate description, 3 descriptions are provided, and then a copywriter still will then click through one of them that they choose, and it'll push it to our backend.
So that's interesting. I want to highlight that. So at some point during the process, you all would have had to rewrite thousands of pages for a new SEO strategy.
Oh, yes. So
by hand.
So not only 80 to 100 descriptions a month, that's on an ongoing basis. We back populated 6,500. So if you can imagine, if I had to go to my copywriting team and tell them, this is what you're going to be doing for the next couple of months on a repetitive basis, I'm terrified of just that scenario. But so not only does it help on an ongoing basis, it allowed us to then engage on this strategy on a backwards basis for all of our historical product descriptions.
Yeah. And that happened naturally. I think, strategically, when we work with executive teams and IT and AI teams thinking about use cases and rollout, really tying it to an initiative that has been daunting or on the back burner because it's so labor intensive or is on pause because we now have no headcount is always a really nice way to, have something very impactful to start with that is non-threatening, and allows people who may not be AI forward to see what the very positive implications are for the day-to-day. So what's the result been like?
Yeah, so this is my favorite metric. So 40% increase in aggregate non-branded search. What that means is, so not someone searching Adore Me, but searching bra and panty set.
Told you.
Bra. I know, we're talking about bras and panties today. And so searching for specific products, a 40% increase. And why, to me, that's my most favorite statistic is that is not directly attributable only to the product description, but the product description revamp was a key pillar in that overall strategy. And I think like as people are thinking about where do you get buy-in, where do you actually show huge impact within the organization, it's making it part of a much bigger business strategy and problem that you're trying to solve. And this is where for us, this was huge for us as, again, as I said, much bigger picture for e-commerce companies. Acquisition is tougher. Within that, SEO is becoming more of an important pillar and strategy for us. Within that, how do we revamp SEO? Product descriptions becoming a key part of that. Let's automate there. Let's back populate 6,000 descriptions. And then through all of that, getting to a point where we actually can show that non-branded search, and again, like going back to making people's lives easier, this is one of those small details that people apparently search for bra and panty set. We sell in sets for the two products together. But to get a copywriter to write that over and over again in a description is, again, one of those things that they're like, I don't speak that way, I don't want to write that way. But that became a key part, and that was a huge increase we saw for that term as well. And then overall, another interesting thing for us was, at first there was a bit of not pushback, it was more, okay, I'm glad that we've moved on, but because we chose the SEO optimized model that we had worked on together rather than the creative, at first people are like, this feels a little robotic. But then what we started to realize was, we saw the metrics were better in terms of click-throughs, is actually customers wanted something super straightforward and informative. Like for so long we had been trying to be cute and overly witty, and again, because a poor copywriter was having to write 100 of these and trying to be fun about it, but we realized that even these more informative structured descriptions actually were preferential for the customers.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I love how quickly your team got sophisticated, right? So we went from like no one on Ranjan's team other than Ranjan even knowing what LLMs or generative AI were, to them actually having like the vocabulary and the understanding like which model had a higher or lower temperature, like which one was going to give them a more off-the-wall idea, which one was going to result in higher click-through rates. So it was really fun to kind of watch your team also go from like skeptics who didn't know a lot, right? You really brought them into a place where now there is just so much reinvention of the processes themselves. And that has been a fascinating thing to watch with some of our early customers, like folks really being able to grab their AI program management like reins and come up with strategies internally that allow them to talk about which types of processes they're going to automate, which ones are they going to partially automate, where do they have really strong proprietary data sets that they can use to fine-tune models. Want to walk us through a little bit about how you all thought about the various content types. They're using Writer and AI for just about everything here, but only product descriptions is fully automated. So that's why that one is in green.
Yeah, so I'll confess I have an MBA, so I think in 2x2 matrices. And so the way I'd started thinking about this was, like, you have revenue risk, high to low. How structured versus unstructured is a problem. So across those two axes. And so product descriptions fit into something that's very structured, but in reality, the revenue risk is pretty low. It's like, it can only help, it might hurt a little bit, but it's not gonna make or break some massive revenue output. versus email and push and SMS are huge drivers of revenue for us. Every SMS you send will matter, will drive some amount of revenue. Every email we send, so the subject lines and pre-headers, they are high risk enough. So we built models around this, but we still use them as first draft or ideation for the writer. They're presented with a number of different options, but still there's a much more involved stance from the writer versus, again, press releases are another one where we use, for anyone who's ever had to write a press release, you basically are writing for robots anyway, so it's like, it's basically perfect for this. But also, again, product description structured, press release is fairly structured. Then even things we found like social captions are actually tough because so much of what's embedded is either like culturally nuanced or just something that's like really of the moment that does not have a large historical data set, or it's tied to the image and what's specifically in the image or the image is about, which I think like is interesting as we get into more multimodal models. And like, I think we'll probably get to a point where connecting what's in an image to generating a caption could work, but that was another one where definitely for now it's not there.
Yeah. We've seen customers ask us our advice around, where should they not have AI ever touch as a result of kind of not letting somebody kind of fall asleep at the wheel or kind of getting too used to AI assistance. Is that something that you've faced with any of the various content types where AI would be good enough, but you really want somebody there?
I mean, for us though, this is where I think the better people get at fine tuning or training, the less risk there is. Because even on a product description, if you were to take a generic data set and you might get some really bad output that gets you in trouble, especially as a brand. If you have an email subject line that goes out where there's no human in the loop and like something a little problematic or questionable goes out, especially if you're training on a generic biased data set, that's a big risk. So I think like those are things people need to worry about, but I think over time, and especially as you start creating data sets and models that are much more applicable to your use case, the risk of that goes away. And so over time, people need to be involved less and less in the more mundane stuff.
Yeah, cool. What advice do you have for the AI practitioners in the room who are excited about getting real use cases in production? Walk us through maybe the top 3 takeaways from your experience of the past year, going from AI curious to real use cases in production driving very significant business results.
Yep, so the first thing again was going back to that 40% number, tying it to a entirely bigger, potentially non-AI business strategy effort within the company. Because that allowed us to see the impact of it. It allowed everyone to realize that this is going to be critical to things. It's not just making fun images in DALL-E or like first of all, moving past the pure fun part of it.
The sandbox part.
Yeah, the sandbox land. Moving past the first draft mentality side, which I think is that's actually the more difficult challenge, where right now, I'm sure everyone you can use ChatGPT to draft an email or for themselves or, like do something, but you're not actually gonna send it out without really going over it. But the idea, again, of creating content that you will actually put out to the world in an automated way is a scary thing. So creating use cases where you really can harness it and control it and make it predictable and repetitive. Yeah. I think that's the second most. And then the third, I said it before, the people challenge of this is really interesting. Like now people are a little more, I think, either excited. Again, when we're spring of 2022, you say this to anyone and people were just not into it. Now I would say within the design teams, the copy teams, and marketing in general, people understand this is probably going to be a little more integral to my career, so I do want to learn a little more. On the engineering side, and I think everyone is like now wholeheartedly jumping in, but I think understanding of what are ways you can really create wins early on that tie to a lot of different parts of the business, that is probably the biggest thing I think people should think about.
What is your ongoing kind of headcount allocated to AI program management or managing what you all automate or what you've built with Writer so far?
Yeah, this is something we've been thinking about, like how to structure this within the organization it's a challenge, or because there's no real corollary that we can think of, because right now, again, a team using Writer, like on the marketing team, we don't need to have an engineer sitting with them. So we're not allocating any new AI headcount within the actual functional teams. Within the engineering side, more people are showing interest, so we're trying to think of like, okay, how do we structure this, but do we create a separate working group? Like one of the things we've been doing is we created a small task force within the media buy group, just so people can play around more and try to get more excited by use cases. But I think this is something where, to me, I see this as more valuable where it's integrated into functions rather than having completely separate departments using this. And again, tools like Writer make that easier for us. So, because the more separated it is, I think the less people will be excited by it. And again, I think the real use cases and outputs that get exciting are when it comes from people who actually do the job and they come up with new ideas. That's what I think should be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What are you excited to automate next? What's on the roadmap for you, or what of the innovations are you excited by?
So I know, like we've talked a little bit, and the Writer, the knowledge graph product that's coming out. Like, to me, the knowledge retrieval, insight retrieval, synthetic AI, or synthesis AI, I think I saw, like A16Z called it, instead of like generative AI, synthetic. To me, this is huge. And this is where the idea of putting a bunch of data or documents into a pile and then having data and insight extracted from it, because we have so much unstructured data. I mean, even like every company presentation that we've ever done, we're all obsessed with slide decks. It was founded by a management consultant, I'm sorry. But so we have like hundreds of slide decks. The idea that we could extract information from there. We have like the way manufacturers send us product information. Each manufacturer has a different way of doing things, different spreadsheets and different formats. We've tried to come up with some kind of automation around this, but the idea of like having a neural network be able to actually do that work for us and recognize patterns and try to extract insights and structure that for us, that I think that takes this beyond just marketing and content people to everywhere in the business. I feel everyone gets really interested, and the amount of business value you can unlock, it really changes everything.
Cool, love that. I'm really excited for you all.
I'm excited to try Knowledge Graph. Yeah.
Ross, can we do a couple questions from the audience? Okay, well, Ross is not here, so I'm going to say yes. All right.
Thanks, that was really interesting. Did you look at any open source models? And, you know, like you've chosen to work with Writer, but, you know, from what Julian was saying, was that something you looked at?
Yeah.
Question, Simon. Can I repeat it for everybody?
Oh, sorry.
So Simon had a great question. What did Adorme look at as they evaluated vendors, open source versus an application versus working with the OpenAI API? You had lots of options. Why did they go the route they did?
Yeah, so, and I believe a couple of the Writer models are on Hugging Face.
Yeah, we have 3 models on Hugging Face as open source.
Yeah, for us, so as a starting point, the Writer Chrome extension, like the most basic part, as I had said, you know, it's like
the editing,
grammar check, word check for you. Having already put our style guide into that, and then having everyone in our company using that as a first touch point, most basic, not even like, no one is even perceiving that as AI, starts getting people integrated into the Writer ecosystem, data going back and forth. Then being able to actually have the Writer tool itself before we built anything custom, and actually getting product descriptions that someone could input directly in there made it easier. So again, a copywriter can do it, not an engineer. And then in the end, we had, again, as I said to start, we had one junior developer kind of hacking together this mid-level part connecting the writer API to ours. To do everything from scratch, I think would take a lot more development work, and getting more people within the company using it and understanding it gets more difficult. But I think, I mean, I loved from Julian's presentation the idea that, like, instead of OpenAI, which is more closed now, the idea of the open source community, like, powering more innovation within this, I think is great. And I think, but also then thinking about how do you get this used in a company?
Yeah. Oh, cool, that's great.
Maybe time for like
Yeah.
one or two more.
One more.
Yeah?
Simon, maybe the final thing for me is this foundation layer here of the LLM. Folks can self-host it, they can bring their own, right? There is a whole body of use cases where being able to give your people an application layer to interact with the model, give you feedback and actually use it, and having a partner that can help around, hey, we're actually gonna need 100 more push notifications, right, to do this, or we're gonna need 30 more examples where sizes are in parentheses, or what you're trying to do with this structuring piece of feedback, we're actually gonna do that as an NLP rule versus try to get it done at the LLM layer. So that has really been where the use cases where we would advise folks to use a partner versus, Simon, just go grab one of our models from Hugging Face, and this is way better done, kind of soup to nuts internally. Yep.
So yeah, here, great conversation. Congratulations on everything you built. It's impressive. I really like the idea that everyone is experimenting, and like you definitely are an AI first company, but having everyone understanding how this works. I'm wondering, apart from the solutions that are being built within each function, are you like saving the prompts, or how are you learning from the people itself that are developing these solutions? Is there a way in which you are, with the auto GPT or reinforcement learning in some sense, getting to learn from what people are using the prompts and the models for?
That's a great question. You want to take part and I'll take part?
Yeah, like, I guess one thing I think would be relevant to that, even on the product descriptions, what we did was every month after 100 new product descriptions are generated, we go back and fine tune the model again, including those as data for the model. So that's one thing, thinking about how do we continue improving this on an iterative basis. And sometimes what we will have is, like, on marquee products, the copywriter still might add something in, if something new comes to light, something's not in the product attributes, and then again, retraining the model based on that input allows the process to continue over and over again.
Yeah. I would double down on that. You know, this process is basically meant to be that reinforcement learning, kind of 3 to 4, but in a kind of high volume, high velocity fashion, and then it slows down, right, once you've launched something into production. So thinking about kind of pre-production and production is great, because you could be tinkering forever, right? And on a lot of teams, especially if they're not as AI forward as Ranjan's team and where they got to, perfect will be the enemy of the good, right? You're saving me 99% of my time, but it's not 100%. So, you know, we need more data. So the executive leadership being like, tying this to a big number or a big initiative kind of plays into allowing folks to get into that kind of let's just ship it mentality and iterate from there. You learn when you start. Great question. Can we do one more? Okay, all right, one more, sorry.
Hold on, I've got a mic.
Okay.
Excuse me. Coming around here. Watch out. Sorry, everyone.
Thank you for the presentation and sharing those insights. I would like to know, how did you kickstart the project? So what team members did you get involved first? And who was leading the initiative at a later stage?
Me to start.
Okay.
But yeah, this is where, again, started with the copywriting team. Even within the copywriting team, started with the person doing the product descriptions, but then getting another copywriter who I just kind of felt would be more interested or gravitate towards this. So finding people, and it was actually interesting, like she had worked at Ernst & Young as an auditor before, but had like a technical background. So that's why starting with someone who you feel can actually like, you know, gravitate towards this and find it interesting. And again, this is before ChatGPT had launched this to the world. So I think it's finding internal champions, again, within the functions. People are just excited by this and seeing what you can do and how you can think about it. And again, the question of what does this look like organizationally, we're still figuring out. I had started this really within the company, but then going forward, how does this live in our tech org and stuff? This is something that we're definitely thinking about right now.
Yeah, it's a great question. Starting with the natural innovators and using them to actually showcase the use cases that they have built is a really nice way to build the momentum grounds up. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ranjan.